My name is Max Broad. Welcome to this call today. It is Monday, April 24th, and we are here to talk about your awesome roles in the restaurant industry and the way that plant-based food options can not only play in increasing consumer interest, increasing revenue, and increasing sustainability. So we'll be talking about that today. I'm really pleased to be here with my friend Laura Cascada from the Better Food Foundation, and we are recording this webinar, and we'll be sharing lots of tips about different strategies, nudges, pro tips, and tools, industry tips that you can use to incorporate and feature plant-based in your menus. I just want to, I'll be presenting about some nudges, and then Laura from the Better Food Foundation will talk about some techniques as well. So thank you all so much for joining. I'm just going to jump into it with a presentation on our nudge strategies. Okay. So, thank you so much for joining. Again, my name is Max Broad. This webinar is Sustainability by Design, Strategies for Restaurants to Increase Plant-Based Food Sales. And I'm here speaking to you as a representative from and founder of DC Veg Restaurant Week, but we're here for all restaurants and all of the DMV food community. So, thank you all again for joining. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. Just want to share, what's the context here? And just last month, the United Nations released their big scientific report saying that, hey, we really need to reduce the impact of food systems on climate change. And food systems are one of the biggest drivers of climate change, especially animal-based foods. So the more we can do plant-rich diets, the more we can do plant-rich menus, it's a huge opportunity for us to reduce climate pollution and build a more resilient society, not to mention a healthier society as well. So, we saw this report come out last month highlighting how balanced and sustainable diets are a key measure to reducing climate pollution, that we need to slash emissions from meat, that Greenpeace is calling sustainable diets one of the critical measures for addressing our climate problems. So this all came out last month in the big AR6 report from the IPCC. So let's just give some context here, some background. We saw plant-based sales increase enormously in 2020. There's a trend and momentum going on. And sure enough, we now see about almost 30% of shoppers who are moderating their meat intake, and over almost 40% who are incorporating plant-based foods into their diet, even if they're not vegan. So there's a big reducitarian, flexitarian trend of people just being more conscious and intentional about what they're buying based on based on health, based on sustainability, based on a variety of factors. We want to help you tap into that. Nearly 90% of consumers say that they prioritize buying environmentally and healthy, responsible food, and many of them are willing to pay more for that. So there's a value add to sourcing not just based on taste and quality, which is all important, but adding that environmental and health and responsibility message. There's also an opportunity to cultivate a customer base, since there are loyalty trends within these consumer demographics. They tend to buy the same products on a repeated basis. They tend to buy them with a higher frequency. And so, this is an opportunity for your restaurant, your establishment to cultivate a relationship with these consumers. And some of the replacements that are most popular are beef, pork, and dairy milk. So, finding alternatives like almond milk, oat milk, that type of thing. Who is buying plant-based? And you can see that while seniors are the least likely to be into this movement, Gen X and millennials, or really the younger generations, are the most enthusiastic about plant-based, although baby boomers and Gen X are both, about a fifth are buying plant-based. So it's quite substantial. But it's, yeah, really the new generation that's driving this. All right, so why are restaurants offering plant-based these days? And there are a couple benefits that we're seeing. It increased customer satisfaction, especially for the folks, as we mentioned, who are looking for responsibly sourced, healthy, sustainable, that type of factor. Attracting new patrons and reaching new demographics, and of course boosting profits by diversifying your menu, diversifying your offerings. And doing so in a way of offering creative and delicious dishes. And we'll give some tips on just how to do that. So let's start with recipes. So first off, one major thing is just focusing on taste, right? So we all want to eat delicious food. And of course, if it tastes bad or bland, that's not driving sales. As somebody who's plant-based himself, I want to eat food that isn't just an assortment of sauteed vegetables that's nicely sauteed. I want to eat dishes that are well composed, that are balanced in terms of protein and carbohydrates and vegetables. And so, having that intentionality and that strong flavor profile is really huge. And then, thinking through the menu, the different elements of the menu, making sure we have not just a salad, right? Or not just one main dish, but having appetizers, having side dishes, having dessert, having essentially one plant-based for every category. And then, what exciting new dishes can you create and redesign? So we want to look for ways to make vegetarian pasta a vegan pasta, right? And vegetarian burrito a vegan burrito. This just opens up the possibilities for your customers. And especially now with new ingredients, including cheeses and meats, plant-based sour cream and cream cheese, that can make all of these options available in new ways for vegans, for vegetarians, for flexitarians, all of the above. So let's talk about some strategies for increasing plant-based food sales. As I mentioned, offering it for every part of the meal from beginning to end, having plant-based, new dishes and redesigning your favorites in clever ways. Even if the first two courses have been brilliant, you want your plant-based diners to leave with a good taste in their mouth, which happens if there's a dessert. And make it available to the whole party, not excluding plant-based diners. And you want to market your dishes the right way to make them high selling, right? So, while there are many customers nowadays who prefer vegan option, but don't go for it if it sounds bland or boring, you want them to be asking for it, diving into it, because it sounds really interesting and really compelling. I know some of my friends on this call, like at the Potter's House, have a really cool new dish that they'll be displaying for DC Veg Week that is called the Romeo. That's, oh, that sounds really fun and intriguing. And what's in it? So you don't want to have people ask for a separate menu or ask the chef to have to modify something that makes them go through extra hoops and loops to buy plant-based and buy more sustainable. So Yeah, let's go into some of these industry tips on optimizing sales. So first off, let's talk about menu placement, right? So put sustainable dishes at the top and bottom of your menu and in the corners of your menu. Customers notice these when they're placed more in these locations, and they tend to make quick decisions based on the dishes in these locations. So menu placement is really important. Oftentimes vegetarian, vegan menus or dishes are just placed at the bottom. They're kind of hidden, buried away, and they signal to the consumer that it's not worth buying these unless you um, are, are really invested and have to look for it all the way at the bottom of the menu. Secondly, naming and labeling is just so important. So, don't call your veg dishes the vegan option, call it something delicious and focus on the tasty ingredients. Use adjectives and don't, for instance, don't call dishes containing, you wouldn't call dishes containing chicken, like the chicken option. And just as you wouldn't want to call something the vegetarian option. So you want to signal to your customers that you care about the dish, and just calling it the vegetarian option, not giving it a proper name, signals that you don't really bother with the recipe either, and makes it feel like an afterthought. So make that dish really feel like it's a priority for you and your establishment. All right, so use descriptive words. All right, let's try this on for size. So spicy Mexican bean wrap. What, like, how does that resonate with you rather than just calling it vegan wrap, right? And we saw research from the World Resources Institute that found that when the UK supermarket chain Sainsbury changed meat-free sausage and mash, was renamed to Cumberland Spice Veggie Sausages and Mash, the sales went up by 76%. So you can see how naming is really important and signals to the consumer what type of priority it is for your establishment. All right, now highlighting and callouts. What you can do is put a box around some of your vegan dishes with a title like Chef's Recommendation or Best Selling, and use these, put these right at the top. Customers will see these dishes first, and they like to feel they are making a popular choice. But don't use a box around your vegan dishes saying vegan. In doing so, kind of signals a social identity that people don't aspire to, and a non-vegan might therefore not even consider this dish in that box. So, non-vegans will look at it and they'll say like, oh, since this has the vegan label on it, it means that it's not for me because I'm not vegan. But if you put other types of labels on your dish that signal that they're good for other reasons besides being vegan, it'll draw a more diverse crowd. Highlighting your menu, you don't want to hide your vegan menu. So make sure that everybody can see the vegan contents. Put it online so consumers can see it and make decisions to come to your restaurant. This is a way to attract consumers. And for instance, you might have a party of 10 who has a vegetarian or vegan in the group. They may roll it out if they don't see that you have vegan options, and you'll lose those customers. So it's the opportunity to make sure that big and diverse parties are your establishment is suitable for it. And then lastly, making sure that your front of house, your staff are well equipped to handle these dishes and well familiar with what it's like to feature these dishes in general. So lastly, incorporating international cuisines is a great tool. And you can incorporate dishes like Indian chana masala and Mexican veggie fajitas and Thai green curry. And again, just think about how delicious those sound. And then lastly, I'll just share that DC Veg Restaurant Week is coming up May 6th through 13th. Registration has closed for the restaurants participating, but we're making a special exception for any restaurants that any restaurants that are participating in this webinar, if you haven't signed up yet and would like to sign up, please reach out to me. DC Veg Week is a great opportunity to trial out new dishes, see how they land on your menu, you know, interact with new customer bases, and build that relationship with your customers and your community in bigger and broader ways. I'll transition over to Laura now at the Better Food Foundation, but I just want to say that, you all as restaurants play such an important role in cultivating the community and culture around DC. And I personally just appreciate that so much, and all you're doing that's creative and thoughtful around food in our community. And you can also play such an important role in helping us think through and transition to a more sustainable world, more sustainable planet, as we're dealing with modern crises like climate change, like these pandemics that are being introduced and cultivated by factory farms where animals are put in confined spaces and close together with very packed with antibiotics. And you all can play such an important role. And so I just ask you if that is a value for you in terms of helping shape and transition a new paradigm that's more sustainable, that's more healthy, and if you can do so in a way that increases your revenue, that increases your access to new markets, to lean into that, to leap into it, and take this opportunity to expand your plant-based options in your menus. So thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Max. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, I'll make that. There we go. Okay, is this sharing?
Yeah.
Everybody got it? Okay, great. Perfect. So thank you so much, Max. That was a great presentation and leads perfectly into mine. I'm Laura Cascada. I'm the campaigns director at Better Food Foundation, and I wanted to talk for a few minutes about default veg and other nudges for our planet. So first of all, what is default veg? You may have also heard the term greener by default. These are both terms for a simple, inclusive strategy that makes plant-based foods the default while giving people the choice to opt into meat or dairy. Greener by Default is now its own program that has spun off from the Better Food Foundation. So if you hear that, that is actually a new organization that is a consulting group. So if you're really interested in using the strategy after I present it to you, they are a group that can come in and help you with menu design on a long-term basis, helping you collect data, analyze it, run different pilots with the strategy. And whereas we at Better Food Foundation are advocating for the strategy in a lot of different spaces, and then we kind of hand people over to them when folks need really like one-on-one consulting services, and it's free. So you might hear me use the terms interchangeably, but they both refer to this strategy. I just really love this quote. When we think about threats to the environment, we tend to picture cars and smokestacks, not dinner. But the truth is that our need for food poses one of the biggest dangers to the planet. So I just want to get into a little bit of why that's the case. So I know you all are here because you've already probably bought into the need for more plant-based foods, but just to kind of give like some perspective as to why this is such a big issue and why you're coming to the table on this issue is important. So in the food system, animal ag uses 77% of all the farmland. It produces 57% of emissions, but it only produces 37% of the protein. So this is really just a great imbalance. And here you can just see a comparison of different animal products versus plant products at the very right, and how many emissions they produce. So you can see there's just this great disparity. On average, the greenhouse gas footprint of plant-based meals is half that of animal-based meals. And here we are just showing like some of the common sustainability interventions that businesses tend to use. So things like zero waste, 100% recycled plastic, or eliminating single-use plastic. Those are great initiatives and we should be doing those. But you can see on the left, just switching beef to veggies or even reducing beef portion size by 25%. Those make a much greater impact. So of course we should do all of the above, but that's why we're specifically so focused on food here at the Better Food Foundation, among many reasons. So just some recent stats about why plant-based foods are also a good business decision. Over the last 4 years, plant-based menu items have increased by 800%. In 2021, 62% of households bought plant-based products, and 36% of Americans reported having recently reduced their meat consumption. So obviously there's a huge market for this stuff. And we're not really seeing this trend being just driven by vegans. There are actually like way more omnivores who are buying these plant-based products and driving these increases. And you can definitely see that Gen Z is a major factor here. 79% of them eat plant-based meals 1 to 2 times a week. And you can see 40% of households are consuming both plant-based milk and cow's milk. So these are, this really doesn't just appeal to the vegans. We aren't trying to just put special options on the menus for the vegans, but we really want to be appealing to the omnivores who are ready and willing to make these conscious choices and incorporate more plant-based meals into their diets. But a lot of people find that hard to do when they go to restaurants or other places where they eat, cafes, institutional dining halls, universities, anywhere that food is served. They find it hard to make these plant-based decisions if they're not already vegan or vegetarian and are looking for those foods. So that's kind of how the concept of default veg or greener by default came about. And this book, it's an excellent book by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It talks about nudges. Behavioral nudges are basically ways that we change the environment, the setting in a certain institution or a place to encourage people to make a certain decision. And one type of nudge is defaults. So to give an example, a default is basically the option that people end up with if they don't make an active choice. So if you think about like your phone ringtone, I bet a bunch of us here just have the default ringtone on our phone because we didn't bother to change it. Either one, because it would take more time, or two, because that's just, what we were given. And that is true with food too. A lot of people will just pick the default option because it is what's given to them. We also tend as humans to pick the most socially acceptable option without even realizing it. So things that are that we feel are normal and that all of our friends are doing, we're more likely to do those things. So here's a really great example with nudges and specifically defaults, which are a type of nudge. So in Germany, where people are by default not organ donors and they have to actively opt in, the participation rate is less than 20%. But in Austria, which is relatively culturally similar to Germany, people are organ donors by default. So they don't have to select anything. They're just automatically organ donors, and they have to actively opt out if they don't want to be. And most people aren't going to actively opt out of that. So the participation rate is over 90%. That's a huge difference. Here is another example of defaults in action in sustainability. So this was a study with businesses that were signed up for conventional energy by default in year 1, and they had the choice to opt into renewable energy. So almost 100% of them stuck with the conventional energy, which actually is kind of surprising to me. But when they did the experiment, they flipped that and made renewable the default with the choice to opt out into conventional energy. And about 70% stuck with renewable when it was the default. And that stayed consistent over time. So they just weren't willing to put in the extra effort to specifically request it, but they're happy to stick with it when it's the default. So default veg is kind of a combination of the idea of plant-based foods being the best type of eating that we can seek for the planet, as well as this default concept. It's a simple, flexible, and cost-effective strategy that still maintains freedom of choice, which is important because I think a lot of times when we try to put into place like meat restrictions or meat bans, as much as that might be effective in taking the meat away and getting people to eat plants, it results in a lot of backlash. But with default veg, nobody's choice is taken away. because basically people are presented with the plant-based option as the default, and then they can choose to opt out of it and pick the meat if they want to. So we don't see a lot of backlash with the strategy. It's a really subtle nudge, but it's really enormously powerful. Really quickly, some extra points that are just really great about this strategy is that it is really inclusive, especially for people who have dairy allergies or lactose intolerant. 30 to 50 million Americans are lactose intolerant. This is also really prevalent in communities of color, especially in Black communities and Asian communities. Also, there are many religious communities that encourage vegetarianism or have other dietary restrictions. And like I said, 31% of BIPOC Americans have reduced or are lactose intolerant, or sorry, a large proportion of them are lactose intolerant, but also 31% have reduced their meat consumption past year, compared with 23% of Americans overall. So this strategy really opens up menus to be more inclusive to just other like ways of eating besides, I guess, the standard American diet, without taking those options away from people. To look at the efficacy of this strategy, this is a study that looked at a series of conferences in Denmark, and when meat was the default, on average, 94% of people stuck with meat and only 6% requested vegetarian. When we flip that and vegetarian is the default and people could request meat, on average, 87% of people stuck with veg. So this is an 80 percentage point increase. This is really a significant shift. So this just looks at kind of comparing greener by default or default veg with some other sustainability initiatives that you could be implementing in your businesses. And you could see that using greener by default can save 9 million gallons for a company with 1,000 employees that serves lunch every day. This is just an example company, versus 600,000 gallons with low flow toilets. And of course, with greener by default, there is a cost neutral or even cost savings associated with it when you install these different other tactics. You're going to have a heavy installation charge at the beginning. So not that these shouldn't be pursued, but again, this is a really cost-effective way to achieve sometimes greater results. So now I wanted to jump into the top 5 implementation strategies for greener by default and how this actually looks in practice. So this is probably the most basic and easy way to do it. You make the base plant-based. So the base is plant-based, and then people can have the option to add on meat or dairy. So this works well with RSVP meals, buffets, and family style and set menus. It also works really well if you have a restaurant that's like kind of the Chipotle kind of setup where people are building their own bowls. You can just make the tofu or the, what Chipotle has with the sofritas, you make that the default, and that's the easy thing. You set it high up on the menu, you put it front and center, and then maybe you've got like a smaller sort of beef or chicken sort of option behind that off to the side where people have to kind of more proactively request it. So this is really, really effective, especially when the meat options aren't quite in view, and that kind of just adds a little bit of an extra effort for people to request them. But again, people can still have them, so people shouldn't be complaining because they can still access them. Another thing you can do with this setup is also add an upcharge for the meat options. So you might add like $3 to add on to chicken. And this is really different from what we normally see, where it's like there's an upcharge to add a plant-based meat. But you don't even have to be using the plant-based meats. You can easily do this with like tofu or seitan, tempeh. So you don't have to get into all the more processed meats if you're looking for a more whole foods plant-based kind of setup. Additionally, you can do a sort of climate-friendly ratio. And while this isn't exactly a default, sometimes you're working with a setup that doesn't quite work with defaults, or your menu might be a little bit too difficult to change into a default veg menu at first. So a similar strategy is where you offer a minimum of 2-to-1 ratio of plant-based to animal-based options. And studies have shown that when 3/4 of options are meat-based, only 12% are choosing the veg option, but when 3/4 are vegetarian or vegan, 48% of people are choosing that. So you're basically just flipping the ratio. So if you imagine, just redoing your menu a little bit and putting more plant heavy options onto that and reducing the meat options a bit so that you achieve this ratio, you're just going to nudge people toward those options without making them feel like that's the only thing they have to eat. Subtle substitution. So this is one I really love because with this one, people really can't usually tell the difference at all. You're basically just swapping in plant-based condiments, milks, desserts, and breads by default, and people usually don't notice. So like if you're serving brownies, you make the brownies vegan by default. And often, I mean, you can label that and let people know that there's no dairy in it because, some people who really don't want dairy are going to be looking for that. But otherwise, people often aren't going to notice the difference. Another popular one is like if you have dishes with, potato salad or pasta salad, you can use vegan mayo instead of regular or, animal-based mayo. So yes, these are inclusive, indistinguishable often, and inexpensive. And especially if you're baking in-house, you could use oil for cookies and brownies instead of butter, and that can be even cheaper. So overall, this is a pretty win-win situation. And then I just wanted to throw in a few more tips. Oops. So another great one is making sustainability the special of the day. So if you're offering a special, make sure it's plant-based. And you can combine techniques by giving the meal of the day a flavorful name and listing it on the menu board to increase sales even more. Also offering the plant-based options at a similar or lower price than their meat-based counterparts. So this is really important because if you're trying to nudge people toward them, you don't want to upcharge for the plant-based options. So like I said earlier, an easy way to do this is making the plant-based options the default and then having a little extra charge for adding meat or dairy. And another really important one is making sure that the plant-based alternatives are comparable. So you, if you have a breakfast menu that has smoked salmon and cream cheese bagel, you want to offer like a carrot lox and tofu scallion cream cheese bagel instead of a bagel with peanut butter and jelly, because you just want to make sure that they sound equally appealing. So this is just the idea of having a menu merger. So, when you have a printed menu, you want to ensure that the plant-based options are incorporated into that main menu and that the first option is plant-based, because this simple change can increase the selection of plant-based items by about 56%. So, the menu on the right is one where they have a separate vegetarian menu. And if you're an omnivore, you're looking at this menu, you see that section and you think, okay, these aren't for me. You don't even look at those. So, I mean, I think of it kind of, for example, if I'm like, I'm not a person who has celiac disease, but I see like a separate celiac menu, I'm probably not going to order those things. But if the gluten-free options are kind of like interspersed throughout, I'll be much more likely to order them just because, I may not be looking for gluten-free, but if something sounds good, I will probably get it. So that's, just a reminder to make sure that the options are not like set off by themselves into a special section. And then, of course, the labels. I know, Max, you touched on this some too. The labels and names of things are really important. You want to focus on taste, texture, and provenance. So roasted red pepper avocado hummus wrap versus vegetarian hummus wrap. I think we can all assume that the people will pick the first one. Similarly, the celiac example, like if you had a gluten-free mouth-watering label versus like a celiac wrap, I think people will easily pick the first one, but probably only people with celiac disease will pick the second one. So I just wanted to go over a few case studies just to show like how powerful this the strategy can be. So our friends at Greener by Default worked with LinkedIn at their headquarters, and the strategies that they used, because this was for LinkedIn's lunch cafe, so they're serving their employees lunch. They used the climate friendly ratios strategy as well as a taste focused labeling, and even just with those quick shifts, it resulted in serving half as much meat per person while maintaining high diner satisfaction. They also, which if anyone here works at or knows of a cafe that is serving coffee, or if you serve coffee at your restaurant, a really great and easy thing to do is to make oat milk or another plant milk the default. So people have to like request if they want cow's milk. And they did that at LinkedIn with their coffee station, and they cut their dairy milk from 70% to 80%. Oh, so that's on the next slide. Great. And we at Better Food Foundation are working with a bunch of cafes that are doing that right now, ranging from cafes at universities. If you hadn't heard, Blue Bottle is also doing this nationwide, and Stumptown is another chain that's been doing this. So it's becoming a really, really popular shift. And I think now is a great time to get in on that. And then I think this is the last case study. So New York Health and Hospitals is another one. They are the entire public hospital system for New York City. They shifted to a plants by default menu. And this one is actually where patients were presented with a special of the day. So we talked about that earlier, making that plant-based. So they're just given that by default. If they opt out, there's actually a second special of the day they're offered that's also plant-based. And then if they opt out, they get a meat option. So it's kind of a double default here. And this was so powerful that over half of all eligible patients are choosing that with a 95% satisfaction rate. They're actually expecting a $500,000 cost savings, which is really great. And I just recently read, after I had put this together, but they saved about, I believe, 37% of greenhouse gas emissions with this strategy over the course of a year. And this is really significant because only about 1% of patients are identifying themselves as vegetarians. So for this high of an uptake rate, it's really great. So this strategy, it works basically anywhere that food is served. Again, you can use several different strategies. You don't always have to do the default option, because I know that's not always possible in every menu. There's different ways like ratios, different ways to construct your menus to make sure that you can just use these kinds of different nudges to most powerfully nudge people toward the plant-based options. So here is my contact information if you'd like to reach out either for help with your menu during this upcoming DC Veg Restaurant Week, or any future menu changes you want to make for a more long-term basis. And again, Greener by Default is our partner, and they can really help with setting you up with a pilot where you're collecting results, analyzing them, and seeing what's working, making tweaks, all of that. They do that service for free too. Thank you so much. And I will stop sharing my screen. Oops.
Thank you so much, Laura. Now let's
Yep.
open it up to questions that anybody may have. And, as we do that, I'll just say, with DC Veg Restaurant Week coming up, Laura, I'm curious, you outlined a number of ways that restaurants can participate in the default veg paradigm, and the way that default veg can match many different restaurants, types of restaurants. What do you see as a good way that a restaurant could model default veg during DC Veg Restaurant Week, knowing that restaurants participate by either offering discounts or deals during on their existing plant-based menu, they offer specialty new dishes, and then they can also participate by participating in the default veg paradigm.
Yeah, so I think the easiest thing there are a couple of things, but I think the easiest thing for most restaurants that are participating for the week could do is basically for the week have a menu that's a bit different from the regular menu, and it can pull in a lot of the same dishes, but you would be changing the ratios up a bit. So if you normally have the vegetarian options off to the side or even lower down on the menu, like make sure to bring those up. Another thing you could do that I think is really, really powerful is like for that whole week, everything is assumed vegan unless it's marked otherwise. So just make sure your menu is like full of vegan options, and then anything that's not vegan, mark that. So it's kind of flipping the paradigm, kind of the opposite of what you might normally do. And again, you don't have to have like only one meat option that people can opt into. I think that works really great when it's like, you know, you have a wedding or an event and people are filling out a registration form. So they're like, you know, do I want the tofu or the seitan? Oh, maybe I click this bottom, you know, box at the bottom if I need, or if I want chicken or steak. That works really well. But I think for a restaurant where you've got a lot more options to choose from, just really pay attention to the ratios, and just like moving those plant-based options up. And then if you have coffee or baked goods, just defaulting to plant-based milks or egg substitutes for the baked goods, you know, flaxseed, banana, that kind of thing, for the week would work really well.
Thank you so much, Laura. So now I'll invite folks. You can put your questions in the chat or come up. You feel free to jump in. Go ahead.
I have a question, but Nethel, if you're running out there in your jacket, you can go first.
Thanks, Matt. It's okay. Okay, I will do that since I do need to run. 2 questions and great presentations. Thanks for putting this on, guys. We'll be sure to amplify it. One, just generally, I'm just curious if you guys are aware of anything beyond the States, like globally for this stuff. I know about DC Veg Restaurant Week. I also am aware there's something in Senegal. So I'm just curious. 2, the more important question for me is in terms of costs and or resistance. So we're planning on reaching out to a restaurant here in Toronto that's perfectly benefits from what you guys are discussing. And they have a separate veg menu. The research would be really useful to see them apply. Like they even put vegan in front of everything on a plant-based menu. So we're planning to approach and engage them on how they can maybe increase sales there. I'm just curious along those lines that I'm wondering if you hear anything about the cost of menu change. Like a lot of these restaurants, obviously, if a restaurant were to make the switch permanently, do you have any data or any sense if that's something that's just something negligible, or is there, and along those lines, is there any other resistance that you either have experienced or would anticipate from a restaurant to which like you're pitching or bringing this concept to?
Max, did you want to answer first or? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, so I think, you know, the one cost area, well, okay, 2 things. One, if you're trying to do this with things like Beyond Burgers, Impossible Burgers, vegan cheese, like that could be more expensive. I think a lot of the places we work with tend to do more of the like beans and grains and tofu and just things that are a bit more cheap, especially in bulk. And so, like I said, like New York City did it at a big scale and had a $500,000 cost savings. However, I think the one place where it is a little bit more difficult, that we are working on right now is the cafes with the milk shift. Apparently in the UK, where we've done some of this, they don't have as much of an issue because I guess they aren't as accustomed to like upcharging for plant-based milks there. Like often the prices are already equal with oat versus dairy. But here in the US, I think the supply for oat and other plant milks is, and maybe in Canada too, is a bit more expensive. One of the kind of workarounds that we've seen cafes do, we worked with one in Portland where they basically just brought, because they did already have an oat upcharge, and so they brought that down, but then they brought it down into the middle, and then they brought the dairy drinks cost also up to the middle. So they kind of met in the middle versus lowering the oat all the way to the former price of the dairy. So they just like raised one and lowered the other, and that helped them, I think, recoup some of those costs. We also do have a plant-based milk partner that we work with. So if anyone's interested, please get in touch. That will offer discounts to help cafes pilot this, because they know that their product might be a little bit more expensive in certain cases. So yeah, I think there are some ways to like work around that, but I would definitely say when you're trying to make like a whole plant-based default menu, don't rely so much on the, you know, the vegan meat alternatives and all those, because you can definitely make some really tasty dishes without those. And if you need recipe ideas, we've definitely got tons, but hopefully, you know, you already have some traditional recipes that you can pull on that you've already got integrated into your menu, and you can just pull those up at the top and you know, lower the meat ones. And so that is pretty much cost neutral. Oh, I forgot what the other question was, if there was one.
I was on just a global, if you guys are familiar with if this is going on anywhere else in the world.
Max, is that something, you've heard about, like other
Oh.
veg weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks to ProVeg International, I think it's the Uganda Veg Society put together an African Vegan Week back in January or February, which was really, really cool. And I know there's growing interest around this type of topic in Asia as well. There's a lot of organizing happening there. That's really cool. And then, what I'll add to Laura's past statement is in terms of, cost and opportunities, I know there's been a lot of price volatility around products these days. And I think that's a great opportunity to start experimenting. I know, for instance, I'm seeing in grocery stores, folks are experimenting with plant-based eggs more as the price of eggs goes up. And there's more cost parity. So, taking advantage of when there is price volatility for products to experiment and get familiar with new plant-based products.
Okay, great. And sorry, just really quickly on that, this is really helpful info, but infrastructure wise, like the physical change of menus, et cetera, is that just negligible?
Laura, can you speak to that?
Sorry, you mean like the cost of like moving around the menu items?
Yeah, so if a restaurant is open to all this, like is that what we're looking at? Like, okay, so you would change your menus to, redesign them so that they can maximize as per Max's point off the top here, but where you want to place dishes and you want to have integrated menus. So some restaurants have a physical separate menu.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only like huge cost would be if those vegan dishes that are being more heavily promoted and shifting people to, like if those were consisting of really expensive ingredients, like they had really fancy cheese and all of that, that could definitely be like an additional cost. But we try to work with places to use just more cost effective ingredients, like just things you can buy in bulk, a lot of whole foods, plant-based items. You can make like some of the places we've worked with have made their own things in-house, like cashew cheese, making it in-house, or making their own oat milk, things like that, that'll cut costs. So yeah, I definitely think if you're shifting the menu and you're nudging people toward more of the plant-based items, and then those are really expensive plant-based items, that could have a toll, because you don't want to have them be too upcharged more than the meat. Like if you're selling a Beyond Burger for like $17 and you put it at the top, but then the meat burger is $13 and you put it at the bottom, you're kind of counteracting the effect of your nudge by doing that. So yeah, we definitely have some ways that we can play with some of that to like help ensure that the costs balance out so that it's as cost neutral as possible, and or like New York City, like cost savings.
Can I ask a question? We good to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify on that. You said it was 500,000 for New York. I didn't get exactly what that was related to, like a specific reduction or.
Sorry, yeah, that was referring to the hospital system. So again, that's not a restaurant setting, but with the serving them the plant-based options by default to all the patients in the New York City hospital system, they saved a lot of money because they were shifting from, buying chicken and beef to more like beans and tofu and grains and quinoa and things that they could buy in bulk that are whole ingredients. And, obviously, I think a lot of us in the US know that meat is, heavily subsidized by various government dollars, unfortunately, in taxes that do artificially lower that price. But we were able to work with them. Well, at least the Greener by Default team was able to work with them to find plant-based ingredients that were actually cheaper, surprisingly, which is, I think, sometimes seen as rare because of how meat is so artificially cheap in this country. But yeah, they were actually able to save about $500,000 a year.
And that was just from like just doing the default. That was just kind of like the net savings from just defaulting the entire system. And one more quick question. I think Max maybe mentioned something about their kind of like for restaurants being like a bit of like a premium, like an ability to make a little bit more money with some plant-based dishes as well. But then also like I've heard that they're cheaper. So there's kind of like this like area in between, like maybe that they're cheaper, but you can also make more money. I've thought a lot about like how a restaurant situation is somewhat of a captive market. And I wonder sometimes if restaurants actually do like just make plant-based things more expensive because there's like the people who want it really want it. Have you guys thought about that at all? Like just the idea that there's a premium because the people who want to eat plant-based really want to. So restaurants can keep those prices a little higher, or do they come down because it's cheaper, or is it somewhere in the middle? Or
I would say there are two ways for restaurants that are great ways for restaurants to capture additional revenue. But one is by increasing your audience, right? A restaurant can reach more people by having a more diverse, more accommodating menu. We love accommodation. The second thing is the products opportunity to use products that are closer to the ground, lower on the food chain, often cost less or have the ability to be more cost effective. As Laura brings up, not all of these, there are premium products like Beyond Meat and fancy cheeses, but also using pulses, tofu, grains. Those are all great ways to explore cost savings.
so have you like noticed at all like any restaurants actually just keeping the prices really high because people are willing to pay? Or do they generally try to bring it down a little bit just to sell?
Laura, do you have any experience with this?
That's a good question. I don't know, but yeah, I think that you do make a good point about some of these places are more captive audiences, like the New York City hospitals, for example, are linked in. So they're not really trying to profit per se. They're more just providing the food for the people who are there. Whereas I know restaurants, that is more of their goal, to have a viable business model that's based around food. And we did share some stats earlier about the popularity of plant-based foods. So I do think like some places will add really exciting plant-based options, especially when new meats or cheeses come out and the restaurant wants to take advantage of that. And often these are more expensive, but I don't know the balance between how much they're paying more for those products, so they have to pass that on to the consumer, versus like artificially inflating it for those consumers. But I do think overall it's a great business decision to be adding more of these options, to be putting them more front and center, and just like captivating, especially capturing that Gen Z audience, especially, that is really growing and wanting to have more of these options.
Definitely. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's always great to have more. I've just been wondering a lot about it because there's like a stadium in Toronto that advertises like all plant-based in the stadium, or at least they did for a point. And I was wondering why they did that. And I was wondering if they were actually marking up all their plant-based stuff and then advertising it because you don't have to tell people to eat what they already know to eat, essentially. So I was wondering if like the plant-based options were artificially inflated because it was a captive market and they were trying to make more money off it. Still good to have it though.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
I'm just curious like a cat.
Yep. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Anything else?
Thank you.
Just one last thing I want to share with you all is that there are a variety of new products that are locally produced, come from DC, BIPOC and women-owned businesses, that we are featuring this Veg Week. So if any of your restaurants want to incorporate them, Vertage makes amazing cheeses. This mozzarella I just tried from Troy's Italian Kitchen. They put it on one of their pizzas. It was phenomenal. They have cream cheese. That's a one-to-one replacement for dairy-based cream cheese. And a lot of these are allergen friendly. So some are made with nuts, but some are not. And so they are, great for, making products more accessible. Smoky Meats is also another locally based company. Makes these fantastic meats that, there's a wide variety. Some of them are even gluten-free, everything from ribs to steak, dry aged vegan steak, awesome stuff. And then the Walnut Tree is specializing in walnut meat, and they have two varieties: the spicy Tex-Mex and Tex-Mex and the Italian. And the Walnut Tree is really cool because they're trying to own that they're different than meat-based or meat simulation. They're just trying to be different and distinct and celebrate that it's natural, it's doesn't contain soy, wheat, oil, sugar, flour, preservatives, and it's very back down to the basics, delicious flavor. I've had it; it's absolutely wonderful. So those are some ways that restaurants can partake in the fun with some local products this year. Okay, last call for questions, or we'll wrap up. Okay, well, thanks again so much for Laura for presenting today. Thank you to all to you for joining. Wishing you all such a great week, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat in case you have any questions or would like any follow-up. And I'd love to be in touch. And thank you all for your time.
Thanks so much. Have a great week.